This is the Louie Tee Network.
In the lab room.
The views and opinions shared on this program are that of Louie Tee and In the Lab Room alone and should be taken exactly as they are given. If you are soft, easily offended, or can't listen to the criticism of your team, this program is not intended for you. This is pure, unadulterated football talk for the hardcore fan. Viewer discretion is advised. Welcome, you are in the lab room. I am your host, Lou. Thank you for joining me here on this program, 2014 NFL Lab Reports. Today we're talking about the Baltimore Ravens. So, without any further ado, let's get it started. It's the 2014 NFL Lab Reports. Baltimore Ravens. Strengths for the Baltimore Ravens. Here's a football team that has been in the postseason every single year since Jim Harbaugh and Joe Flacco have teamed up as head coach and quarterback. Last year was their first year missing the postseason in that era. So, Ravens looking to climb back up onto their horse after winning the Super Bowl just 2 seasons ago. So you talk about some strengths from last season and a disappointing campaign it was for the Ravens. Not unexpected, but they did some things well last season. Even though they didn't finish where they wanted to and they didn't make it to the postseason, this Ravens football team did do some things well that they need to look to carry into 2014 along with them. One of those being special teams. I talked about this before with a previous team on this program. And I talked about how there were 3 elite special teams units in the National Football League a season ago from a return standpoint. And those 3 teams were the Kansas City Chiefs, the Minnesota Vikings, and these very Baltimore Ravens. So, when talking about special teams, it would be very remiss of myself to not talk about this Baltimore Ravens special teams unit. And it's not just Jacoby Jones, Double J, and his ability to break big plays in the returns game for this Baltimore Ravens football team, even though he is a huge part of why this special teams unit is so dominant. Because he is one of, if not the most volatile and explosive special teams returnmen we have in this game today. I think he's taken the place of Devin Hester as far as a guy that you can't take your eyes off of, and you've got to be careful where you kick the football and how you proceed, and you need to proceed with caution when going up against the Ravens because of Jacoby Jones and his ability to break a play on moment's notice. And so his ability to return and not just get a big return, but take it to the house. This guy is one of those players that's electric, and I think the Houston Texans are kicking themselves because they let Jacoby Jones walk away in free agency because of him not being the receiver they wanted him to be. And they did not focus on what he could bring to the table as a special teams return man. And he was doing this in Houston. And so the Ravens have reaped the benefits of this Jacoby Jones fella coming in and really turning it up on special teams. And you look at not just him and what he's been able to do for this Ravens special teams, but also looking at another player that has taken this Ravens special teams unit to another level, and that's Justin Tucker. Just incredible is what he's been since he set foot into the National Football League. Justin Tucker has elevated himself into one of the best field goal kickers, if not the best field goal kicker in all of the National Football League. And I've talked about this on several other programs, that you need to have a stable kicker on your football team. And Justin Tucker isn't just stable. This dude is incredible. Hence the name Just Incredible. And so last year, he lit it up, much like he did in 2012 when the Ravens won the Super Bowl. And he was a huge part of the reason why. We can't forget that kick in double overtime against the Denver Broncos to help them win that football game. This kid is incredible. And his ability to knock the football through the uprights, including a 61-yarder last season, is part of the reason this Ravens special teams is extremely special and definitely a strength for the Baltimore Ravens. You go to another strength for this Ravens football team. And these next two strengths, they kind of coincide with each other and go hand in hand. And the first one that I want to talk about is completion percentage defensively given up by this Ravens football team. They don't give it up defensively in terms of completion percentage. Like a lot of these teams struggling against the pass in this league, the Ravens were a dental floss thin 56.8 in terms of completion percentage against the pass last year. And you know, that's huge because in this league, it is a passing league. I say this all the time. You know this, man. It's a passing league. And so your ability to get your hands on footballs, Ravens, 5th in the league in pass deflections. Okay, that is a huge stat. Ravens getting their hands on the football, knocking it away from receivers, lowering that completion percentage of these quarterbacks, making it tough on teams to convert third downs, which takes us to our next strength for this Baltimore Ravens football team. Third down conversion rate. Defensively, the Ravens were third best in the league in third down defense. Getting off the field on third downs are important in this league. I talked about this before. You'll hear me talk about it again. Getting off the field on third downs for a defense is monumental. Same with the offense. Extending drives, picking up third downs is huge. It is critical. And on the defensive side of football, getting off the field on third downs is just like having a turnover. You're getting the football back to your offense. Turnovers are better because they shorten the field. It's a sudden change of possession. But getting off the field on third downs cannot be overstated. Getting off the field on third downs is huge because it does a number of things. One, it continues to help your defense get off the field. It gives them momentum and it gives them confidence to continue to play good football throughout the rest of the football game. B, number two, it gets the football back to the offense. And three, it stops teams from scoring touchdowns, from scoring field goals, from scoring points. If you can get off the field on third downs and stop drives before they get started, you're doing something major in this league and you're going to stop teams from scoring a lot of points. And if they already are in field goal range, you get off the field on a third down, guess what? You're holding them to a field goal and not giving up a touchdown. And who's to say that they make the field goal? So those two things go hand in hand. Those two strengths are huge for the Baltimore Ravens. Completion percentage given up, and they were really good. The passer rating is down as well. I think they had the 5th or 6th best passer rating in terms of a defensive unit. They're not giving it up through the air. And if you're a football team in the National Football League, you want to have a happy medium. You don't want to get gashed on the ground. To me, that's demoralizing. But also, because of how this league is starting to turn into a pass-happy league, you got to be able to stop the pass as well. And the Ravens were able to do that successfully We'll talk about their pass defense a little bit later. But last year, it was a strength and one that they want to continue to see flourish in 2014. You move on from the strengths of this Ravens football team to, of course, weaknesses. Now, of course, when you don't make the postseason, especially when you're a team that annually makes the postseason, there are some things that you did not do well in that season to prevent you from getting where you normally go. And so, with this Baltimore Ravens team, you take a look at their weaknesses, and the first one that jumps off the page at me is defensive penalties. And that is something that you cannot have as a football team if you're going to take that next step in terms of staying where you normally are and being consistent and keeping teams out of the end zone and giving up points. This Ravens defense was not that bad last year. In fact, they had improved greatly over the 2012 season when they won the Super Bowl. As a football team and as a defensive unit, they had gotten much better. But these defensive penalties are a huge part of the reason why they weren't able to keep teams out of the end zone. The Baltimore Ravens not only led the league in defensive penalties, but they led them in yardage stemming from those penalties as well. And the bad part about what the Ravens did defensively with these penalties wasn't just that they were racking up penalties, is that the yardage coming from them was egregious. And so you know where the penalties were coming from. They were pass interference penalties. They were roughing the passer. They were face mask penalties. They were some big chunk yardage penalties because the Ravens almost had 1,200 yards in penalties defensively a season ago. The next closest team, to be exact, the Ravens had 1,196 penalty yards. The next closest team was the Tampa Bay Buccaneers with 1,012. So wrap your brain around that. They were almost 200 more penalty yards away from the next team. So that gives you an idea of just how bad the Ravens were defensively in terms of racking up penalties. And in this league, the team that you're playing against, they're already good enough. They don't need your help. They don't need your help. But the Ravens went out of their way and took it upon themselves to go that extra mile and assist teams in scoring points a season ago. So defensive penalties is something that this Ravens football team must clean up. It's not optional. That's something that needs to be addressed, and they're going to have to be better. In the NFL, they're talking about cracking down even more on the defense in terms of putting their hands on receivers, and it's supposed to go both ways. Receivers are supposed to not put their hands on the defensive backs while the ball is in the air, and they're going to get a little bit more touchy-feely with those penalty flags. It could be just a deterrence, but if that's any indication on how things are going to go this season, the Ravens could be in some trouble because there are some really touchy-feely defenders for the Ravens, as evident by the amount of penalties and yardage stemming from those penalties a season ago. That's definitely a weakness that the Ravens cannot carry over to 2014, because if they do, they'll find themselves in the same exact predicament they were in a season ago, missing the postseason. You go on to another weakness of this football team. And this is not actually a weakness, but it is. Let me explain myself. Field goal attempts. Ravens led the National Football League in field goal attempts with 41. Now get this. They made 38 of those field goals. So while they kicked a lot of them, they made a lot of them. So that's a good thing, right? But here's why it's a weakness. Who wants to kick 41 field goals? I mean, when is that ever a good idea to kick 41 field goals? I don't know about you. I don't know about you guys. But me, I want to score touchdowns. My team gets into the red zone. My team gets into the other team's 25-yard line, 30-yard line. I'm looking to strike gold. I want pay dirt. I don't want to kick a field goal. I don't want to kick a 47-yard field goal. I don't want to kick a 42-yard field goal. I don't want my kicker going out on the field and kicking a 37-yard field goal. Well, the Baltimore Ravens kicked a lot of field goals last year. Now, kicking field goals is one thing, but why and how you're kicking field goals is another. And the why is the biggest part of kicking field goals, because it's one thing if you're just getting narrowly into field goal range, or you're getting down the field so often that you can't score a touchdown every single time, but 9 times out of 10 you're getting the football and you're getting into field goal range, and at least you're coming away with 3. Look, 3 is better than nothing. However, that wasn't the case with the Ravens. It wasn't like the Ravens, every time they touched the football, they put together a drive, and the ones that didn't end in touchdowns ended in field goal attempts. No, the Ravens just weren't getting into the end zone. End of discussion. That was their biggest problem last year, is that they were a field goal kicking football team. And you never want to be one of those. You want to put the football in the end zone. Whether you run it, and the Ravens were one of the worst teams on the ground last year. We'll talk about that here in a second. But they didn't get rushing touchdowns. So they weren't running the football into the end zone. And Joe Flacco did not have a banner season last year, so they weren't throwing it into the end zone either. And so they were settling for a lot of field goals. And that's something that you don't want to do, because, again, in this league, guess what my mantra is? You know it. You already know what I'm about to say, but I'm going to say it anyway. And it's about that time I start dusting off a lot of the rhetoric and the mantras that I use, especially this one, because it's not really valid in the offseason, but it's just about that time to start using it. Field goals don't win games. Touchdowns do. You already know. And so last year, the Ravens found that out the hard way. Field goals don't win games. Touchdowns do. And so if you're the Baltimore Ravens, you got to get in the end zone. Simple as that. And look, I love Justin Tucker. He's just incredible. However, I need you to get in the end zone, man. I'd much rather score touchdowns than kick field goals. And I know the Ravens would too. You move on to the next weakness, and I talked about this just a few seconds ago. The Ravens' rush offense was anemic last year. And I'm going to just lump these next two in. Both of these are weaknesses. Let's just go ahead and knock them off both at the same time and kind of get them out of the way, kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Pass offense was bad. Rush offense was bad. And really, the offensive line was right in the center of this mess. They were the crux of this problem. The offensive line did not protect Joe Flacco. They gave up 48 sacks last year. That was good for 5th worst in the league last season. And they just couldn't get it together passing the football. Joe Flacco had more touchdown passes, less touchdown passes than interceptions. They threw 22 of those. And as a team, they threw 23 interceptions. That was good for 2nd worst in the league last year, behind Eli Manning and his abysmal season in New York. So they were turning the football over. That pressure that was being applied to Joe Flacco, being hit, being sacked, took its toll on the offense, and they weren't able to pass the football. And again, their receiving core left a lot to be desired. Outside of Torrey Smith last year, the options were few and far between. Dennis Pitta coming back is a welcome sight for this team. He came back late in the season last year, but by the time he came back, the damage had already been done. And so it's going to be a much different offense. Hopefully the offensive line is much improved this season. You'd like to think so. We'll talk about the offensive line a little bit later. But not only was the pass offense bad, but the rush offense was even worse. Ravens dead last in yards per carry with a dental floss 3.1 yards per carry. Keep in mind, you want to have at least 4 yards per carry. That's the league minimum. That's what you're looking for. 4 yards per carry. That's the benchmark. If you're not hitting that, you've got a serious problem. Not only did the Ravens not hit that, but they proceeded to almost be a full yard under that number. And so that is bad football any way you slice and dice it. Ravens have to be better running the football. Some of it was the backs. Ray Rice struggled last year. Bernard Pierce struggled last year. But this offensive line was not moving anyone out of the way. And that was the real problem last year. There were no holes. There was nowhere to run. I can't tell you how many Ravens games, and I watched all of them last year. I can't tell you how many games I watched and I said to myself, wow, Ray Rice didn't even have a chance. He'd get the football, and as he received the carry, there were 2 or 3 defenders waiting for him in the backfield. I can't tell you how many, countless times I saw that to be the case in Baltimore last season. So they have to shore that up. Offensive line needs to be much better. And this running game in general, they've changed the whole way they're going to run the football. Gary Kubiak is the new offensive coordinator. And so they're going with a zone run blocking scheme now and I think that's going to fit Ray Rice perfectly. I think Ray Rice is much better suited to stick his foot in the ground, one cut and go much faster than slow. I think that's going to help him. He's cut some weight. We know about his controversy and him being suspended for the first 2 games of the season. We'll talk about that in a second. But pass offense, look, you can't be bad at both. In the Ravens' word, pass offense and rush offense. Hence, this Ravens team didn't score a lot of points, kicked a lot of field goals. Hence, the Ravens missed the postseason. Those are all weaknesses that this team has to tighten up. But you go from all of those weaknesses to, of course, camp battles with this Baltimore Ravens football team. So as we break down the camp battles and the experiment for this Baltimore Ravens football team, I will be using the assistance of my big board that you see behind me. So let's get to the proceedings this evening, shall we? Camp battles for this Baltimore Ravens football team. And this is a veteran-laden team. One that feels like, hey, a change here, a change there, and we'll get right back to where we were before. And normally you don't do that by adding young guys. They always help. You want to add some young blood to the mix because you don't want to find yourself waking up one morning and being an old football team. And that's what happened to the Ravens last season. They woke up after that Super Bowl championship and they looked around after all the dust had settled and the smoke cleared, and they were old. And guys had moved on and retired, and all of a sudden they had to rebuild this thing. And the Ravens aren't used to rebuilding. They're used to reloading. And last year was a rebuilding year of sorts. Even though they don't rebuild, they reload. Last year it was a sort of rebuilding season. One of those ones you take it on the chin, you move on from it. And I think the Ravens feel like they're in a better situation going into the 2014 season. So you look at some of these camp battles. You start at backup quarterback. Tyrod Taylor versus Keith Winning. Tyrod Taylor is an interesting case because here's a player that's been in the league but hasn't proven himself, hasn't had to because Joe Flacco is one of those quarterbacks that doesn't get injured. Ravens held their breath collectively last season when Flacco took a shot to the knee, sprained his MCL, was able to play through it. However, they haven't had to rely on Tyrod Taylor. He's gotten mop-up duty late in the season in some games against the Bengals. And so he hasn't proven himself. He played against New England last year. He struggled. 2 years ago, he played against Cincinnati in the season finale in a game that the Ravens didn't need. He struggled. He has not proven himself, and the Ravens are looking to upgrade that position. However, new offensive coordinator Gary Kubiak seems to like Tyrod Taylor's athleticism and his ability and thinks it fits very well with what he's asking him to do in this offense. And so I think the Ravens are comfortable knowing that Tyrod Taylor has been in this league, has been able to see what happens on a daily basis, on a week-to-week basis, knows how to prepare himself just in case something were to happen. And so I think he's got the upper leg in this competition. But Keith Winning is a guy that Ravens drafted out of Ball State, and I watched the tape on him, and I was somewhat impressed with Keith Winning. And I think that in the future, he might be the answer to the Ravens' backup quarterback quandary. But Tyrod Taylor is going into the final year of his contract. Depending on what happens this year, maybe he'll be back, maybe he won't. Keith Winning, if he does not win this battle, and I don't think he will, barring injury, and Tyrod Taylor could easily play himself out of this position. Again, the preseason will tell the story here with this backup quarterback situation. But Keith Winning is a kid that is eligible for the practice squad if he were to not make this roster. I think that's where he's going to end up. But again, if he comes out, balls out in preseason, and Tyrod Taylor does the inverse of balling out, we could see a changing of the guards at the backup quarterback position. That's just one to keep an eye on throughout the preseason. You go to running back, and this is a big position for the Ravens. I talked about the struggles of the Ravens running the football a season ago, and you need to stop right here and look at this situation that they have going on at the running back position. Ray Rice going to be out for the first 2 games, a very controversial suspension. A lot of people on the outside looking in wanted the NFL to be a little bit more harsh on Ray Rice because of his domestic violence situation with his wife, Roger Goodell. And again, I say this, and I'm not going to say anything else. We don't know the full story. Have you seen the tape? Because all you saw was him getting off the elevator, dragging his wife. Do you know what happened in the elevator? Do you know what happened before that? No, you don't. No one else does except for Roger Goodell, the court system, all of those parties involved, Ray Rice, his wife, and that's it. Nobody else really knows what happened. So we don't have all of the pertinent information. We don't know all of the circumstances surrounding the situation. Am I in any way condoning what he did? No. But you don't know the story, so you can't say this should have happened or that should have happened. Roger Goodell saw the tape, and he did what he saw fit. 2-game suspension. That's all Ray Rice is getting. So the Ravens have a situation on their hands. First 2 games of the season, what do? You've got some guys back here underneath him battling for those starting roles in those 2 games. Bernard Pierce, a guy that was extremely productive in his rookie season, not so much in 2013. But then again, nobody was behind that god-awful offensive line. So he's going to probably get the first crack at starting behind Ray Rice and starting those 2 games in his absence. And here's the big question down here. Lorenzo Taliaferro was a Ravens 4th-round selection. And I think it's pretty safe to say that the running back out of Coastal Carolina will be on this roster. Now, do you keep all 4 of these running backs? Because, of course, Ray Rice will be back. Won't count against the 53-man roster for the first 2 weeks. So you're going to probably keep all 3 of these running backs in Bernard Pierce, Lorenzo Taliaferro, and Justin Forsett. Question then becomes, when Ray Rice comes back, do you need 4 running backs? Because when Ray Rice comes back, he and Bernard Pierce and Lorenzo Taliaferro will probably be getting the bulk share of the carries. And so where does that leave a guy like Justin Forsett? Will he perform well enough to stake his claim on this roster, or will he be a casualty when Ray Rice comes back and they cut down his roster spot and only keep 3 running backs? That is the question at the running back position. We will see. But these guys need to step up. The offensive line needs to be better. That's half of the equation. The running backs need to be better. And I think this zone run blocking scheme that Gary Kubiak is implementing this season is going to help this rushing attack of the Baltimore Ravens. You move on to receiver. And this was a position that I barked and harped on all last offseason, was who is the Ravens going to throw the football to? Well, Torrey Smith said, hey, they can throw it to me. And I was doubting whether he was a number 1. I thought he was the perfect number 2. He said, man, who are you talking to? Who are you calling a number 2? I'm a number 1, man. And he went out and showed it last year. He caught everything, and he still was able to stretch the defense. And so Torrey Smith has elevated his status within this league as a number 1 receiver. He's now a legit number 1 option. And so you found a number 1, but there was nothing else. Marlon Brown was a nice revelation, but he still was really relegated to being a red zone target, and a really good one. At 6'5", that kind of frame always helps when you get around the end zone. Adding some of the stuff that they were able to add in the offseason, getting your tight end back in Dennis Pitta, adding Owen Daniels, drafting another tight end, helps your situation. Crockett Gilmore now coming onto this football team. So now you have a slew of tight ends that can get it done. You add a guy like Steve Smith Sr. to the mix. And let's talk about this. 7 receivers for 5 roster spots. Torrey Smith, Steve Smith Sr., Marlon Brown, Jacoby Jones, K'Mar Aiken, Jeremy Butler, and Michael Campanaro. Those are your 7 receivers. And you can go ahead and take these 4 out of the equation. Torrey Smith, Steve Smith Sr., Marlon Brown, and Jacoby Jones, Double J, all on the roster. So forget about them. You got a 3-for-1 situation over here, however. K'Mar Aiken, Jeremy Butler, and Michael Campanaro. Now, K'Mar Aiken is a young man that has had a journey around the NFL in his young and brief NFL career. Has been around the league about 3 or 4 different stops. Hasn't been able to stick on an NFL roster quite yet. And he's getting an opportunity, and he's making the most of it in Baltimore. Early on, the favorite to win that 5th and final roster spot was Michael Campanaro. I mean, the Ravens spent a 7th round selection on him. He fits what the NFL has shifted to in the slot, a small, jittery guy that can get in and out of breaks quickly, snatch the football out of the air, very good hands. Can be questionable at times with his hands. I take that back. That was one of his knocks at Wake Forest, but he had to learn how to run routes. And if he got better at that, studied the film, I'm pretty sure they put on tapes of Wes Welker and guys like that to help him with that position, he was going to win that battle. However, he's been injured. Ribs and all kinds of different injuries throughout camp. If he can't stay healthy and perform on the field, someone else will take his roster spot. Now again, much like Keith Winning, he's eligible for the practice squad. If he does not make the team, I expect him to be stashed away on the practice squad. That is pending that he passed through waivers and isn't picked up by another football team. So that's another question that you have to ask yourself. Can we sneak him onto the practice squad if he does not make our roster? But I don't think the Ravens are concerned about that. They want the best player on this roster that can help them right away, not only as a receiver, but on special teams. And right now, K'Mar Aiken, the young man that has been around the block a few times, has seemed to learn from those experiences. He's catching everything, and at 6'2", he brings a big body receiver to the mix. So does Jeremy Butler. He's a 6'2" receiver as well, undrafted rookie free agent. And so he's bringing a little something to the mix. However, I think K'Mar Aiken has separated himself from the rest of this group. Jeremy Butler still has an opportunity, and so does Michael Campanaro if he can stay healthy. But that's going to be interesting. The preseason, much like for the backup quarterback position, is going to tell the story at receiver for those 3 receivers trying to gain entrance into this roster. And there's also a 3rd wide receiver battle on your hands between Marlon Brown and Jacoby Jones. Marlon Brown performed so well last year as the 2nd option at receiver that with Steve Smith Sr. coming in, he gets bumped down to the 3rd receiver. However, Jacoby Jones has been a viable 3rd option throughout his career as well. And Marlon Brown has struggled in camp. He's not catching the football, which is something that he didn't struggle with a season ago. So all of a sudden, now Jacoby Jones seems to be a viable candidate to win that 3rd wide receiver job when it looked like it was Marlon Brown's job to lose. Either way, both of these guys are going to see the field a lot in 2014 in Jones and Brown. However, to have that distinction as the 3rd receiver, to get those snaps right off the bat is huge. And so that's a battle worth keeping your eye on as well. But both of those guys are going to see the field in 2014, regardless of who wins that battle or not. You move on to the cornerback position. And this is probably the weakest area on this Ravens football team. Not a lot of depth that you trust on this roster. And I thought that losing a cornerback that ended up going to Buffalo last season in the offseason was a huge blow to this Ravens football team, because I thought he played some really good football in Corey Graham. And so looking at the depth on this roster, it will be tested. We'll talk about that here in a second. But let's look at the cornerback position as a whole. 6 for 5. 6 cornerbacks for 5 spots. Jimmy Smith, Ladarius Webb, Chalky Brown, Asa Jackson, Tremaine Jacobs, and Deji Olatoye. And so let's start with the 4 guys that we know are going to make this roster. Jimmy Smith, Ladarius Webb, Chalky Brown, and Asa Jackson, all making this roster. Okay. Where you have a positional battle is 2 for 1, Tremaine Jacobs and Deji Olatoye. Now, Deji Olatoye was all the rage early on in camp. I mean, there was an uproar about this kid, the undrafted rookie free agent out of North Carolina A&T. He came in at 6'1", close to 200 pounds, and he was electrifying everybody with his athleticism, his ability to make plays on the football. There was a buzz early on in camp about this kid throughout many camps and into the early stages of training camp. But that has subsided. His inability to find a football, to make plays, to line up right on special teams, just the little things. And the difference between making a roster and being, the 54th man on the roster, which means you ended up being cut, is very finite. It's very, very small. And so Deji Olatoye doing things and making mistakes like not knowing where to line up on special teams and being yanked off, that's a problem. And so a guy like Tremaine Jacobs has been the beneficiary of Deji Olatoye's mistakes of late, and he is the favorite right now to make this roster as the 5th and final corner. That is definitely something that will play itself out throughout the remaining stages of training camp and the preseason, so keep an eye on that. There's a third cornerback battle here for your slot position between Chalky Brown and Asa Jackson. And Chalky Brown has been lit up like a Christmas tree in training camp. And he's not only been lit up like a Christmas tree in terms of guys beating him deep, but he's also been a lightning rod for problems and fights in camps. He's been into a couple of fisticuffs with Steve Smith and other players on the team. So he's a guy that brings a lot of energy to the field. Some of it good, some of it not. But he's not doing himself any favors in terms of that third corner battle with his play on the field. And Asa Jackson is a guy that quietly has been going about his business. I wouldn't be surprised if he took that third cornerback position. The depth behind Jimmy Smith and Ladarius Webb is going to be tested this year. I thought Chalky Brown at times played well, but he was in a 4th, 5th corner role then. Now, if he's bumped up to nickel duties, you're going to see how well he's going to be able to perform and how well the depth of this Ravens football team at the cornerback position is and how it will hold up. And so that's something to look at, this cornerback position for the Baltimore Ravens. And last but not least, a starting battle at safety. The Ravens are looking to solidify their free safety position. And after drafting Matt Elam a season ago and him manning up the strong safety position, and in this league, safeties need to be interchangeable. You were looking to bring in another safety, and you drafted Terrence Brooks, the rookie out of Florida State, to come in and put together a young tandem at safety between Brooks and Elam. However, Brooks hasn't caught on as fast and has really been disappointing to the Ravens at how slow he's caught on at the safety position. And this kind of goes back to what I've been talking about a lot recently with these rookies. And that's the fact that as a rookie in this league, you have to understand that it's tough. It's tough to come in and make the transition until things slow down for you as a football player. And it normally doesn't happen in your rookie season. It normally happens in the second and in the third season where you actually see things happen before they happen. And you don't have to think as much. You can just go and react. And Terrence Brooks, right now, he's processing information. Things have to slow down for him, and they haven't yet. The speed of the game is tremendous, and it's different than it was at Florida State. And his ability to read what the offense is trying to do to him and get to his fits and where he's supposed to be in a running game and where he's supposed to be in his coverages, and him moving fast enough and realizing where he's supposed to be, terminology, play calls, and getting lined up correctly. All of these things are coming to him very slowly right now. And it's because he's having to process information. Ravens are a little disappointed. And so, because of that disappointment, Darian Stewart, who came into camp as the starter, remains the starter. They went out and got him from the St. Louis Rams, a fifth-year veteran, a guy that's been in the league, seen some playing time in St. Louis as a starter there. And so he's going to get the opportunity to start. It's his job to lose. And right now, because of Terrence Brooks' slow transition to the National Football League, I think it's safe to say that Darian Stewart will win this battle if he just plays consistent football throughout preseason. Now, again, just because he wins this battle doesn't mean he's going to remain the starting safety all season long. If Terrence Brooks starts to get it as the season wears on and things start to become more natural to him, he will probably step in as your starting free safety at some point. But right now, the struggles are real for Terrence Brooks as an NFL safety. And so Darian Stewart looks to have the upper hand in this battle at one of the starting safety positions. So those are your camp battles for the Baltimore Ravens. We move on from there to the experiment, which I have titled, quote, "The Ravens Nevermore." Jumping into the experiment with this Ravens football team, research question. After missing the playoffs for the first time in the Flacco-Harbaugh era, did the offseason acquisitions move the needle enough to restore order for the Ravens in the AFC North? Huge question, because the Ravens are in uncharted territory. This is unfamiliar to them. They're not used to coming off of a season where they didn't make the postseason, especially with Joe Flacco and John Harbaugh as your head coach quarterback tandem. Those two only know playoff contention. That's all they know. They only know extra football. And last season, they didn't get it. So did they make enough moves in the offseason? Did the draft and getting C.J. Mosley and getting a slew of guys that you feel like can come in and help you, whether it's Crockett Gilmore at the tight end position, Terrence Brooks at the safety position, a big guy up front from the defensive line of the Florida State Seminoles, and Timmy Jernigan. Are these selections going to help you? Is the acquisition of Darian Stewart, Steve Smith Sr., retaining a guy you traded for in the middle of the season last year in Eugene Monroe, is that going to help this Ravens football team? We will see, because a lot of questions remain with this football team, and some of them have not been answered quite yet, but we will see. It's a long season to go. So we move on to the hypothesis. If the Ravens can get more consistency from their oft anemic offense and the defense continues their climb back to dominance, then the Baltimore Ravens can shift the balance of power in the AFC North. This division has been overtaken by the Cincinnati Bengals. The Ravens, they used to be one of, along with the Pittsburgh Steelers, one of the landlords of this division. Everybody else was paying rent. The Ravens would sit there, and every 5th of the month, the Ravens would come to collect. For the Cleveland Browns and the Cincinnati Bengals, they'd come collect the rent for them playing in this division. And all of a sudden now, there's been a shift in power. The balance of power has shifted in the way of the Cincinnati Bengals. They're younger, they're hungrier, and all of a sudden that youth turned into experience, and they started winning football games. That talent started to overtake what the Ravens had in terms of veteran leadership and know-how, and all of a sudden the Ravens found themselves looking up in a division that they used to control, along with the Pittsburgh Steelers. It's one thing if you lose the division to the Steelers. That's a team that you respect. And not to say you don't respect Cincinnati or Cleveland, but the level of respect isn't the same for those two teams as it is the Steelers. So if you were to lose the division to the Steelers, you say, okay, tip my cap to those guys. It's the Steelers. But when it's starting to be the Cincinnati Bengals that's smacking you in your mouth and you wipe your lip and it's a little bit of blood there, all of a sudden now you get mad. Wait a minute. Who are these young Thundercats? Who are these young punks? Who do they think they are? You the old heads on the block now. You and the Steelers, you the old heads. And now the Cincinnati Bengals say, hey, you had your time. It's our time now. We running the show. We manning it now. And so, if you're the Ravens, you got to go back and take what's yours. And that's the AFC North division. It was okay. It was cool in 2012 when you snuck in the back door to the postseason and you were able to make that improbable run, go on a road, beat some teams, get to the Super Bowl, win it. That was cool. But there's nothing like winning a division. There's nothing like saying, I'm the king of this mountain. I'm the king of the hill here. It's my show. And if you're the Ravens, that's what you're looking to accomplish in 2014. Get back to the top of the mountain and look down and say, I'm the king of the world inside the AFC North division. So, materials needed to make that happen. Unflappable Flacco. Joe Flacco has to be unflappable. This offensive line let him down tremendously last year. And I can tell you this much. And I know I'll get a lot of grief and a lot of flack. You get that? You get it? Forget it. I know I'll take a lot of flack for what I'm about to say, and I don't care. You know I don't care. And I've said this before, and people have beat me up for it before, and they'll probably beat me up again. But if you ask me who I wanted to give the football to as a quarterback, minute and 41 seconds left, no timeouts, 84 yards of real estate in front of them. Down by 4, so you got to have a touchdown to win. You ask me who I'm handing the football to? I'm going to tell you Joe Flacco. He's Joe Cool under pressure. Now, fourth quarter pressure and having to win the football game. And yeah, I'll give it to him before I give it to Brady, Manning, Rodgers, Breeze. None of them cats. Give me Joe Flacco. Because I know he'll get it done. Eli Manning, all them cats. Give me Joe Flacco. Say what you want. But Joe Flacco gets it done in crunch time. When the game's on the line. Now, my problem with Joe Flacco is all the rest of the game. When the pressure's on, when there's pressure in his face, you got to play better. Your offensive line, so what? They didn't protect you last year. So what? Your receivers didn't win one-on-one matchups all the time. I still need you to be more cautious with what you're doing with the football. 19 touchdowns versus 22 interceptions. For a guy that was coming off of a Super Bowl season and getting a big deal, I can't have that. We can't have regression. Okay? We can't have you throwing the football all over the field and turning it over. You've got to be unflappable Flacco outside of the fourth quarter under 2 minutes. I saw what you did last year against Minnesota in the snow when it looked like the game was lost. You did what Joe Flacco does. I saw what you did against the Detroit Lions late in the season last year when y'all had to have it to keep your playoff hopes alive. I saw what you did taking your team down the field and putting them in field goal range for just incredible to knock it home and help you win that football game. I saw that. That's what you do. It's what you do for the first 3 quarters of the football game that concerns me. I need you to be unflappable. Yeah, the offensive line needs to be better. I know that. I get it. I understand. Nobody likes to be under duress. Nobody likes to be sacked 48 times in one season. I get it. However, you still, in the face of pressure, have to play better. Have to make better decisions with the football. If it's not there, throw it away. Check it down. Don't force the issue. I know you got a cannon for an arm. Everybody knows that. You don't have to prove anything to us. Stop throwing interceptions. Stop throwing the football to the wrong colored jersey. Be unflappable, Joe. Be unflappable, Flacco. Laissez-faire. You remember high school when they taught you about different forms of government and European government and the French government, and one of the approaches that the governments across the water used to take was a laissez-faire approach. That's French for hands-off approach. Staying out of the affairs and the business of other people. Laissez-faire, hands-off approach. Well, I'm telling the Ravens on the defensive side of the football to take a laissez-faire approach. Hands-off approach. Don't put your hands on the receivers past 5 yards, especially when you're 37 yards down the field, because you don't lead the league in amount of penalties and yardage the way that you did without putting your hands on guys down the field and not finding the football. Find the football. Don't find the receiver and grab him. How about you find the football instead? I guarantee you the penalties will come down exponentially if you find the football versus finding the man and grabbing him. Grab the football. Why don't you do that? Stop grabbing the man, because you know the refs, they're itching. They're trigger happy. They're itching to pull out that yellow hanky. And if you give them any probable cause, they pulling it. They pulling the trigger on that flag, and they ringing you up. And they did it a number of times last year. And so, if you're the Ravens, laissez-faire. Tell your cornerbacks, tell your linebackers, after 5 yards, laissez-faire, hands-off approach. You cannot lead the league in defensive yardage and penalties this season. Can't happen. Won't happen. Won't win with it. Can't win with it. O-line incline. That means the offensive line must be trending upward. They can't play the way they played last year. That was terrible. No running space, no running room for the running backs. They didn't protect Joe Flacco. Almost got the man injured. Had a sprained MCL. The offensive line got better when Eugene Monroe came on board and manned up the left tackle position, and he's back on board. And it looks like you're starting to solidify this offensive line. Now you're looking to man up that right tackle position, and you've got a young guy out there, I believe his name is Wagner, who's been starting, Ryan Wagner, if I'm not mistaken, who has been starting at right tackle for you, and you've been impressed. And so if you can find a right tackle to hold it down, no more Michael Orr on this football team. He's now gone to Tennessee. If you can find, with Eugene Monroe at left tackle, if you can find someone to stand up and be a rock at right tackle, I think you found your niche and your balance across the interior of this offensive line with Yonda and Osemele, and you feel like there's some balance there across the middle of this offensive line. So I think that the Ravens are going to be better up front as an offensive line. You just need consistency out of the guys that are going to be in front of Flacco. And I think this zone run blocking scheme will fit this offense a little bit better. Anxious to see how the interior of this offensive line handles the switch to a zone run blocking scheme, because you got beef in the middle, some bigger guys. But if they can handle getting out to the second level and reaching that initial block and sealing it and giving cutback lanes to these running backs, it will benefit, because obviously the power run blocking scheme wasn't working a season ago. And so this switch to a zone run blocking scheme might be a breath of fresh air for not only the offensive line and the running backs, but even Joe Flacco, because the lack of a running game last year was huge in the struggles of the pass offense. You know, these things go hand in hand. You can't run it, then you can't pass it in this league. At least not the way you want to. You need to try to bring down that extra safety. Make him nosy coming down into the box. You didn't have to do that against the Ravens last year. You could stop them with 7. If your run defense was good enough, you could stop the Ravens' rushing attack with 7 defenders. It was that bad last year. So, O-line incline. They need to protect Joe Flacco, bring that sack total way down, protect him, give him an opportunity to go through his progressions so that interception total can come down. And you need to be able to open up lanes in the rushing game for your running backs. O-line incline. The specialist is the next material needed. The specialist. Jacoby Jones, Double J, keep doing what you're doing, man. You're the best in the game right now at what you do. Just keep doing what you do. Keep doing what you do so you can hit him with the little joint at the end when you get in the end zone. And Justin Tucker, just incredible. Just continue to be incredible. Continue to be just incredible. Look, I don't want you kicking 41 field goals. I don't want you pounding home 38 of them. Look, you had the highest percentage of field goals made last year. Most attempts, most made, and one of the highest percentages at 93%. You only missed 3 field goals last year. That's great. Keep doing what you're doing. If the Ravens send you out there, make the field goal. But if I'm a Ravens fan, I'm hoping not to see you 41 times this year. I'd much rather see you 41 times on extra points than field goal attempts. So just continue to be the specialist. Keep doing what you've been doing because your special teams is dynamic and they win football games. This Ravens team wasn't good enough to win the amount of games they won last year. They weren't good enough. They shouldn't have been even in the playoff discussion. This wasn't a good football team in terms of offense and their ability to put points on the scoreboard and win football games. This offense didn't average the 22 points or so the Ravens averaged as a team. That wasn't the offense is doing. This special teams unit helped and chipped in. The defense helped and chipped in. This offense was anemic last year. Hard to watch at times. Medusa, hard to watch. So you've got to help because we don't know if this offense is markedly better in 2014. We don't know for sure. You got to continue to help them win that facet of the game. If the Ravens are going to get to 10 wins, 11 wins, and win this division, special teams is going to have to be special once again. So the specialists are going to have to stand up. The law firm of Smith, and Smith. That's the next material that's needed. The law firm of Smith, and Smith. And of course, I'm talking about Torrey Smith, Steve Smith, Jimmy Smith, and Daryl Smith. You need all of them to step up. Every last one of your Smiths on your roster is an important Smith. You need all of them to step up. Torrey and Steve are your 1-2 combination at the receiver position. I don't know who thinks that Steve Smith still can't play football, but there's still something left in that tank. And he's out to prove that he still can play football. And he's going to do that for this Ravens football team. He's going to prove to be your new Anquan Bolden, a veteran with toughness that plays fearless, that's going to do all of the dirty work. Block, go over the middle, can still stretch the field a bit. Steve Smith still can play football at a very high level, and the Ravens are going to be the beneficiaries of the motivation that he was offered up in the offseason. So I expect him to play at a high level. Torrey Smith showed me something last year because I was doubting that young man. I looked him right in his face, right in his eyes. I said, "You're not a number one, man." He said, "The hell I'm not." And he went out and proved it. I stand corrected. I already apologized to that man, but just in case you didn't get it the first time, I apologize, Torrey. You went out and you balled out last year. So I expect him to step up again. He's the number one option in Baltimore. He takes the top off the defense. I expect him to do it again. So I'm really not worried about those Smiths. What about Daryl Smith? Not only is he your best linebacker, or at least he was last season, but he was your rock-solid anchor in this defense. You lost Ray Lewis, and you gained another veteran presence. He's the leader, not only of the defense, and I know you could argue Terrell Suggs, and you were looking for someone to come in and help you. It was this guy right here. He was the man on this defense last year. Daryl Smith came in from Jacksonville and immediately filled the void left by Ray Lewis in terms of leadership on this football team. And you could argue, I'm not here to argue with you because I think this was a fact. He played much better than Ray Lewis did in 2012. So he actually elevated the play of the middle linebacker position in Baltimore. And I expect him to continue to be the leader of this defense along with T. Sizzle and continue to play at a really high level and help this Ravens defense get back to where they used to be, which is a top 5 defense. And last but not least, Jimmy Smith. This is the most important Smith of all the Smith I named because he's the one that still, to me, has something to prove. Torrey Smith went out and proved it last year. He needs to prove it again, but he proved that I can play at a real high level. Steve Smith has done it for the life of his career, and so has Daryl Smith. Jimmy, however, I'm still a little questionable on him. I'm still a little iffy. I think the jury's still out on Jimmy Smith. All the potential in the world, all the raw ability, I need to see consistency out of this young man. We will see because the Ravens cornerback situation is one that does not lend itself to a lot of success in 2014. I could see 1 or 2 injuries to their starting corner. And Ladarius Webb's already banged up and has been over the last 2 seasons. If he's not able to stay healthy and you got to reach into that depth and pull a corner out, you could be in some trouble. So you don't need Jimmy Smith to be wilding because Ladarius Webb has already shown the propensity to get injured. So somebody's got to be solid and be a rock at cornerback if Ladarius Webb wants to trip and get injured. That man needs to be Jimmy Smith. So the law firm of Smith, and Smith, they need to be lawyers and players who know how to win. You move on to the last and final material needed, purple and black D. I remember when this Ravens defense was one of the best in the league, and they were purple and black. They were bruising teams up. They were nasty. They were physical. They were beating you up. And when you left games, you weren't black and blue. You were purple and blue. You were swollen. Eyes were closed. Face was swollen. Purple and black everywhere. You were beat up. You were disfigured, discolored. And you had the mark of the Raven on you. You had the purple and black all over you. You knew you were in a football game. You knew you were in a fight when you played the Ravens. Over the years, that has diminished somewhat. The Ravens need to get back to that. They need to get back to a place where you're fearing their defense, where their defense is among the best in the league. You know, because the old Ravens used to just take the run away, just off the bat. You came into the game hoping you could run, knowing you weren't. And you had to take to the air, and that's when they would come after you. They would blitz, and Terrell Suggs, T-Sizzle would come after you, and they would send guys from all different angles, and they'd swarm and force you into some mistakes. They got to get back to that kind of defense. Purple and black D, they got to get back to being dominant on the defensive side of the football. So you go from there to the independent variable, offensive line. Talked about this offensive line already. I'm going to talk about this offensive line again because this team on the offensive side of the football is only going to go as far as this offensive line allows them to. Because we know Joe Flacco can play at a high level. We've seen him do it. We saw the playoff run 2 years ago, which warranted the big deal. We've seen him perform when the lights have been their brightest. We know about Joe Flacco. We know about Ray Rice. We've seen him be an all-purpose threat in this league. Run it, catch it out of the backfield, do everything you want him to do. We've seen Bernard Pierce play at a high level as a backup. The offensive line controls all of that. If they don't protect Flacco, he's going to struggle like he did last year. If they don't open up rush lanes, Ray Rice is going to struggle. Bernard Pierce is going to struggle like they did last year. And you're going to be one of the worst teams offensively in the league like you were a season ago. Offensive line controls all of that. They need to be more consistent and more stout up front. And that independent variable leads to the dependent variable. Better offense, more aggressive defense. If the offensive line does their job, then the offense will just be better. And they need to be just better. Offensively, passing, running, they were bad last year in both departments. They need to be better. And the offensive line is going to be the catalyst for them being better on offense. Better offense, more points on the scoreboard means this Ravens defense can be more aggressive. When you're playing not to lose, because the offense isn't giving you a lot of ammunition, they're not scoring a lot of points. When you're playing not to lose, you got to be a little bit more conservative on the defensive side of the football. That means you got to take less risk. You got to make sure that everyone's doing their job and in their positions, and you can't blitz as much. You can't be as aggressive because if you don't hit home and it's zero blitz, zero coverage, and it's man-to-man across the board and you're rushing 7, and everybody's singled up, and a guy gets beat for a 72-yard touchdown, you're in trouble because the offense isn't going to help you out, and you know that. So as the Ravens defensively is concerned, they want to be more aggressive. They want to be able to take some chances and some risks. And the way they'll be able to do that is if the offense is better, and it starts with the offensive line. So the offensive line is the independent variable, and better offense, more aggressive defense is your dependent variable stemming from that independent variable. Constant in Baltimore. Front office stability. Since about 2002, since your owner, Steve Bisciotti, has taken over, this Baltimore Ravens team has been a model of consistency, the way you want to do it. Ozzie Newsome has grown into one of the best general managers in all of the National Football League. I mean, that's why the Ravens have adopted the mantra, "In Ozzie we trust." He seems to get it done every single year. When it looks bleak, when the situation looks to be in dire straits, in peril, Ozzie Newsome pulls them from the wreckage. Whether it was the mass exodus of 2013 that had this Ravens team looking like they were going to implode, and them still being in a position to make the postseason at the end of 2013 was remarkable. You know, he had to make some tough decisions. He had some TDs to make. He had to give Flacco all that money, so Anquan Bolden became expendable. You lost Ray Lewis and Matt Burke and Ed Reed, and all of these guys had to go. Ray Lewis left, and Ed Reed was looking for too much money. You had tough decisions to make, but he made them. And you're a better football team now because of it. This front office is among the best in the league. And John Harbaugh is an extension of that onto the field. This front office and their stability isn't matched by many other organizations in this league. There are probably about 3 or 4 other ones where you could look at around the league and say their owner, their GM, and their head coach, all top flight. And that's why that organization is in the position that they're in. You know, you could throw the Packers in there if you like. You know, the Steelers are one of those organizations that get it. Patriots are always atop the pecking order when talking about front office stability. And this Ravens team, they're right smack dab in the center of that conversation. They just get it as an organization. They draft well. They go out and they pay their players. And they only bring in guys that they feel like can help on a need-to-have basis. They don't go out fishing for free agent acquisitions. You rarely see the Ravens go out and throw a host of money at guys from other teams. They normally take care of their own, and that's what the good franchises do. Last year, they had to go out and get a guy like Eugene Monroe. And they went out and traded for him, and they made sure they kept him. They had to go out and get a Steve Smith. They needed the help at receiver. They needed that veteran presence. So this front office, they get it. And the front office stability has been a constant for this Baltimore Ravens football team. That's why they have 2 Lombardi trophies over the last 14 seasons. So you go from there to the conclusion. What does this all mean for the Baltimore Ravens in 2014? Do I think the Ravens are truly ready to get back atop the AFC North? With what they've assembled talent-wise and the change in offensive philosophy and losing some of their integral parts of their team, Terrell Austin has gotten a job as a defensive coordinator in Detroit, and he left to go with your offensive coordinator from a season ago. I just don't know if all the changes to the staff, bringing in Gary Kubiak, and some of the free agent acquisitions that you have made, is this offensive line going to be where they need to be? Is a running game going to get back off the ground? I don't know if this Ravens team is where they need to be or not. I don't have all the answers. I just know that when it's all said and done, they're going to be in a discussion when we're talking about teams making the postseason. Will 9-7 be enough? I don't know, but that's what I have the Ravens going in 2014. Will 9-7 be enough? It would have been enough last year for the Ravens. They just couldn't get there. This AFC is wide open. There's no dominant football team. We want to crown the Denver Broncos and the New England Patriots as the dominant football teams, but we've seen them be dominant only to be knocked off in the postseason. The AFC is wide open. It's anybody's ballgame. Unlike the NFC, where there are some really good teams up here, and then there's a huge drop-off after about 5 or 6 teams in the NFC. This AFC thing is wide open. Anybody can make it to the postseason, including this Baltimore Ravens team. We know how it changes from year to year in the postseason. You know, 3 of the 6 teams that make it the year before usually get out, and 3 new teams come in. the Ravens might be one of those 3 new teams to enter the postseason. It won't be unfamiliar territory to them, but they weren't there last year. Is 9-7 going to be enough? I don't know. But that's what I have the Baltimore Ravens doing in 2014. So that's the lab report for the Baltimore Ravens. Thank you for joining me on this program. If it happens in the National Football League, whether big or small, we cover it all here in the lab room. I thank you for joining me. Come back and join me tomorrow. We'll be talking about the next team up, the Jacksonville Jaguars. See you then, 7 p.m. sharp. Have a good one. Like the content? Want more? Sub up.